Hello, everyone. My name is Randy Harrington, and it's a little rainy here today in Kansas. So I took the day off work, and I wanted to put together this presentation that's been on my mind uh, about a few things that happened on the Kiamichi Ridge. We'll just call this the Kiamichi Ridge, and you're going to need to get used to it because I've got several more presentations of things of happenings on that ridge south of Honobia, Oklahoma. And on a previous YouTube video that I did, I explained the ridge pretty thoroughly, uh, locations of the campsite, of the base camp, and all that. So we'll touch base on some of that here. Uh, but as you can see in the title, are Bigfoots running by tents? It's kind of interesting. Had a few incidents in the Kiamichis that made me think that indeed this is happening. Why, I don't know. Uh, could I be misinterpreting a small animal running by? Possibly. Uh, I mean, could it be? I mean, could it be a deer? Could it be? I'm not good on saying, oh yeah, that's bipedal or that's on four legs. I'm not smart enough to say that. I can just tell you that something ran by the tent, and it happened uh, at least three separate times. And so I want to go over that and the reasons why I think it could be a Bigfoot behavior. So let's move on. I'm going to show you some pictures of the Kiamichi area. That way you can get a good idea of just how thick it is. So I'm going to move on to the next picture and let you see some of it. Here's a view from off top of a ridge looking down through, some of these valleys, uh, quite a ways, quite a distance, lots of cover. And here's a little closer. This would be standing on a logging road, looking down, and you can see how thick things are. Some areas are thicker than others. Some areas have been logged. Uh, so it's your typical cover, forested cover areas. All right. To start this, I want to go to a book called The Locals by Tom Powell. Now, I've spent some time in the woods with Tom Powell in this location. He came down there to speak at a conference, and we spent a couple of nights together camping. Nice guy. Now, he was a BFRO researcher, and he was working some areas up in Washington and Oregon. And as you can see here in this book, chapter 5, it's called The Dance Hall Days. And I recommend that anybody get this book. It's a great book. And so the chapter called Dance Hall Days, he talks about being on this Washington farm where there's a lot of stuff going on. And he was sleeping out under a tarp in a sleeping bag and had some things happening. But specifically, I want you to read on page 72 or 92 where he said something sprinted or I'm sorry, it's a little small for me. But basically, something ran by as he was sleeping, uh, and he could hear the feet slapping the ground. And what I there's two things that I find interesting in that he wrote this, that it happened to him. First of all, that something ran by while he's asleep in his sleeping bag. Something feels that that's something to do is to run by. That's just kind of an interesting thing. Now, this included all kinds of other behaviors, like he heard something in the brush, he heard breathing, he heard movement, snaps and poppings of the brush and things like that. So it was preceded by other known Bigfoot behaviors in an area where there had been plenty of sightings, and that's why he was there, because of what was happening on this homestead. Uh, so the other thing that I thought was interesting that he specifically wrote about is the sound of the feet slapping the ground, because that's what I recorded. If you go back and look at one of my other videos that I posted about the bluff charge up in Washington. When this thing finally broke from the wood line and was on the logging road and ran, you could hear it actually made slapping sounds as the feet hit the ground. So that's interesting that he wrote that specifically, and I've got that kind of evidence from something that happened to me that also included a bluff charge and a temper tantrum. But the slapping of feet on the ground, is that because of, I would, you and I go sprinting across the ground and we're going to be on our toes. So it'll probably be more of a softer plant of the foot. Is there some dynamic about their feet that make them run flat-footed so that their feet slap the ground? That's interesting. That's not very often do you have things written and cooperating with someone else to be similar. So that might be something worth looking at. Anyways, so he wrote about it in the book. Something did run by while he was sleeping. And I've also talked to a guy in Colorado who told me back when I think I first announced that I had something run by the tent, and he reached out to me and he said that it happened to him a few times, and that he just calls it a run by, where one does a run by, and so that's what I've been calling it, because now we're starting to see that there's a possible pattern in different places in the United States, which is crazy. A pattern of something running by for whatever reason, trying to get a response. Is it testing itself? Is it testing whoever's in the tent? Was he being dared by another youngster to run by the tent? Who knows? You can speculate all you want. All I can do is say this is what happened. Is this what happened? All right, so here is the area of the Kiamichis where, you know, we have the base camp and almost everything that I'm going to be posting in this area is from the years that I've spent camping in this area. But as you know, you've got the base camp area, and I'm just going to put this on here so everybody can see it. But you've got the base camp, putting an X there where the base camp is, and you've got this ridge that runs up this way. The only way in here is right here below base camp. See right there? That's where you can come in. That's the only way you can come in, because if you go down this ridge, you'll eventually come to a gate. There's a locked big yellow gate that swings closed, and on the other side of that is a hunting lease. Now it's further out than this picture shows, but I'm drawing the gate right there, but it's further out. So further down that ridge is a gate that blocks off a thousands of acres of a hunting club. Now there's another way you can come in here, up here up on this corner by Honubby. That trail is only accessible by ATV. It's very steep and rutty, extremely rutty, deep ruts that a vehicle would really struggle and more than likely bottom out in multiple locations. So those are the only two ways you can come into this area. That's why we've always been comfortable at this base camp, because when we're doing things in this big area in here, we know that the only time that anybody can come in, we will notice them coming by our base camp. So there's an upper ridge here, and of course they're all connected with logging roads but there's an upper ridge here that also goes west to east, and it too has a gate further back that you can't get through. And on the back side of that is a hunting lease. Now, these aren't the gates that people use to access the hunting lease. The entrance to the hunting lease is somewhere else, 10 miles down the road. And this is just a gate that is the backside of their hunting lease. So we're doing all of this within that area on the backside of a hunting lease that nobody goes through these gates. And it also keeps traffic to a minimum on our side, because everybody there or anybody local knows that you can't get through those gates. So they have no reason to spend a whole lot of time up in this area. So it's been a great area for me to spend the last 15 years or longer uh, going and just camping and seeing what happens. So that gives you a good overview of what's going on here. So here is a closer view, and you can see the little X over here, and that's the base camp area. And you remember that from my videos before. So you go up this ridge, and that number 2 spot where the X is, that's the general area where I set up a tent one night. But this is the second time. Uh, so I want to tell you that the first time, okay, here's a view showing you where the base camp is, the ridge going to the east towards where I had that number 2 spot, and then you can see a number 3 there and a number 1 up there on the upper ridge. Now, what I want to talk about is about 2010. I was there with a group of people at the base camp, and I came up with the idea. And I know other people have done this, and it's not my idea, but it was my idea at the time just because I was thinking about it. And I said, hey, I got this extra tent. Why don't we take a four-wheeler and go up and just set it up and leave a recorder laying in the tent? And this was a long time ago. So right where you see the number 1, there's a spot right in there that went up there with a four-wheeler, popped open an instant tent, so it didn't take very long. You just popped it open, dropped your recorder in the floor of the tent, hopped on the four-wheeler, and left. And what I thought was interesting at the time is, so we go back to camp and do our thing. And it was till the next day that I go up there, collect everything, and then it takes me a long time to get the audio downloaded to listen to what happened. But what I thought was interesting at the time is you could hear the ATV leaving the area. You could hear it going off on the distance till it was gone. I mean, and it wasn't long after, maybe 30 minutes, and that's adding time to it because it wasn't very long. You just started hearing movements coming around the tent. I mean, you actually heard rocks being thrown, you heard them hitting the ground, you heard an interaction with the tent, and it culminated with, over time, something running by the tent. And at the time, that was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that, and we thought it was really interesting. It was like, man, it sounds like something running by the tent. Now, that happened so long ago that I didn't keep any of that. It was just an interesting thing to log in my head just in case it pops up in the future. And indeed, it did pop up in the future. So fast forward to 2016, 2017, 2018, 19, when I'm going down there, and there was a stretch where I started messing with using tents again. So we're going to go back to the number 2 area, the number 2 tent area. Remember, the first time it was like 2010 when I recorded a run by of tent placement number 1. All right, now here's tent number 2 on that lower ridge. And that X with the circle is where I was camping a lot of the times when I was there. As a matter of fact, the photo from the title page shows the campsite right there, where my truck and tent was all set up just off the logging road into the edge of the woods there. Now that arrow is showing going in the direction where about another 100 yards or so is that locked gate that you can't get through. And we spent a lot of times camping up against that gate and then walking into the hunt area after dark. Huge area, and of course nobody in there after dark. So we'd walk on through there, or at least on the logging road, and then just come back. Uh, but the number 2 spot is where I once left a tent. Now, the way I left this tent was different than the first one. The first one was just a dry, dark tent with a recorder laying in the bottom. This tent I set up in a way that I wanted to mimic activity within the tent. So what I did was I hung a string and I had a little battery operated plastic fan that blew, and I had a piece of cardboard hanging on the string so that it would just kind of flop and drift in front of the fan and move with a little light in the floor, so that from outside the tent it looked like something was moving around inside the tent. You just see shadowy movement, but it was that little fan blowing the cardboard disc in front of a light. And I had a recorder of my grandsons at the time, which were only like 3 and 4 years old, and very animated little boys running through the house, screaming and hollering and laughing and chasing and crying and all of the things that you would expect nonstop. So I recorded about 2 hours of the boys just raising hell here at the house. And so I had that along with a regular recorder that was recording things. So I put them both in there. One was playing the boys, and then the other one was recording. So there was about 2 hours of the boys playing, and then it stopped. And my idea was that if it drew attention of something on the outside of the tent, that they would hear the boys in there doing what they're doing, and then when it stopped, what would they think? So it was shortly after that. I mean, we're talking like 10 minutes. 10 minutes after the recording went off of the boys, I got this thing running by the tent. Uh, so that's going to be the recording that you're going to get to hear right now. Now, there's the road way down the hill from this location going towards Pickens from Honubby. And it's the road that I described used to be gravel, that it was the last state highway that they paved in there. But anyways, it's a long trek uphill from Honubby going up from that intersection all the way to Pickens. It's a long stretch and it's all going uphill. So when a car goes up there, you can kind of hear it tootling along, grinding its gears going up that hill or whatever. So you're gonna. It was kind of windy that night, as well as you can hear a car, but here's the recording of the footsteps coming by the tent after, and it happened 2 a.m. All right, so here's a pulled out picture of the area where the tent and the campsite, or the tent and the recorder was somewhere in this location, and you've got this highway here where you could hear that vehicle. So there was a vehicle running up this hill that you could hear in the distance. So that's how close it is to a road. I mean, it's still a mile or two away from this road, but you can hear, because it's the way sound carries in those mountains. When a car goes up that road, you can hear it. So that was the run by, and it was at 2 a.m. So I took note of that. Okay, so now here we go closer to camp. When I listened to that the next day at my campsite there at the base camp where the X is, I listened to it and I was like, man, that is cool. So I said, I'm going to reset the tent up somewhere else. So I went down, and as the other logging road goes up towards the next higher ridge, there's a space in there where I could set a tent, and I did the whole thing again on the next night. So these are separated by only 24 hours. in a different location. And this is actually not far from base camp, but it's higher up in elevation. And anyway, so I set this up, did the exact same setup where I played the recording of my grandsons and had another recorder to record it, and it got a run by. And the one of the most interesting things is it happened at 2 a.m. That floored me. The thing is, when I had the run by on that first one that I did 10 years earlier, I didn't get a time mark on what time it happened. It just happened. So who knows? But here's two in a row, in two different locations, maybe a couple miles apart, on two different ridges, and both run-bys happened at around 2 a.m. Now you got to start taking note. Is there a pattern here? It's just weird. So anyway, so here's the next one. Eerily similar. And then you just hear it run away. It runs by, must be fairly close to the tent, and then you can hear it going off into the distance, still chugging along. All right, that's it. It's an interesting subject. Let me know if you've ever had anything run by your tent in the middle of the night while you're out bigfooting.